Okay, audio sound bites. Here we go. This is the sound bite. This is what led to Jorge Ramos being escorted from the room at the Trump press conference before his speech in Iowa last night.
Trump has a question about immigration. Your immigration plan.
Okay, who's next? Yeah, please.
Trump, I have a question.
Excuse me, sit down. You weren't called. Sit down.
No.
Sit down.
No, I'm a...
Sit down.
An immigrant.
Go ahead.
I have the right to ask the question.
No, you don't. You haven't been called.
I have the right to ask the question.
Go back to Univision.
No, this is the
Go ahead.
You cannot deport 11 million.
Go ahead.
You cannot deport 11 million people. You cannot build a 1900
Go ahead.
wall. You cannot deny citizenship to children in this.
Sit down, please.
Those ideas.
You weren't called.
I'm a reporter and don't touch me, sir. Don't touch me.
Go.
You cannot touch me. I have the right to ask a question.
You can't touch me. I have the right to ask a question. And Trump, no, you don't. You weren't called on. Sit down. Wait your turn. You weren't called on. They gave the nod to the security guy. The security guy came over, and it was only then that I learned how little Jorge Ramos is. Not that it matters. The guy is tiny. I didn't know it. You know, you see these guys on TV, they look 6'4", authoritative. And you see this guy, you can barely see him over the pitcher's mound if he plays third base. Jorge Ramos, an activist for illegal immigration. That's what he is. He's not a news anchor. He is an activist. He's one of the leaders of the whole concept of illegal immigration. Now, go ahead and play the next one, because in this next bite, I wasn't originally not going to do this. I was going to jump something else, but let's play it. This happened in Dubuque, Iowa, by the way. After this happened, after Jorge Ramos was escorted out, another reporter stands up for him, and Trump said that Jorge is obviously very emotional, and there's something not right here.
President Obama has taken some tough questions from Jorge Ramos. Is there a reason why you won't?
Because he was out of order. I would take his question in 2 seconds, but he stood up and started screaming.
Would you let him back in now?
I told you already. If he wanted to come back in, I'd love to have him come, but you can't just stand up and scream. I was saying to somebody else, is that correct? I was saying yes, and this guy stands up and starts screaming. He's obviously a very emotional person.
Right. He was attempting. You know, look, everybody knows this. I spent a lot of time last night, because I was a captive audience. I was watching post-Trump analysis, and it was funny to watch the drive-by media try to analyze what had happened here. But I tell you, the vast majority of them actually concluded that Jorge blew it. That what Jorge did, he walked in there and he was going to try to take over that press conference. He thought because he was Univision and Hispanic that he would intimidate everybody. Everybody would lay down because they're protected class right now. And Jorge would be able to finally embarrass and humiliate Trump and expose him. That's what Jorge wanted to do. There's no question in my mind. Jorge Ramos walked in that room with his objective being to take Trump out last night. There's no question. He had on his Dan Rather hat. He had on his Sam Donaldson hat. And instead, he got deported. He got deported right out of the room. And then a reporter says, you know, President Obama didn't have any problem answering questions from Jorge Ramos. I have a problem when he's out of order. He wasn't his turn. It wasn't called on. It wasn't his turn to get in the country. We're going to build a wall here. We're going to make it so that you just can't get in here illegally. We're going to follow the rules, pure and simple. So Jorge gets escorted out. You can't touch me. You can't touch me. I don't think anybody wanted to. Bill Carter on CNN's New Day. Bill Carter, he is the New York Times TV reporter. They've been leaving over there. That's why I paused. I didn't know if he was still the New York Times or not. I guess he is. Who was it? Chris Cuomo said, question is simple, Bill. When you look at that situation yesterday, what was right, what was wrong, and what worked in it?
Well, I think it worked very well for Trump. I think he was commanding the situation. I think Jorge looked like he was trying to interrupt the guy, and then he had the optics of saying get out, which sort of plays like he was deporting him in some way. The optics were like his message. You know, you get out unless you're polite.
Deep,
unless you're polite. Now you come back. You can come back. Now I'll address. But I command the microphone. We couldn't even hear Jorge talking. You could only hear Trump, and it sounded like he was being reasonable. He was handling it. To me, he controlled that situation.
When is the last time you remember a journalist not standing up for another journalist? No. This is the first, I can't remember a time where a journalist did not stand up for another one. This guy at the New York Times just threw Jorge in the back of the coyote wagon. Normally, what about it? But that was the Neil Monroe thing. Neil Monroe, he asked, well, that's my point, Snerdley. In that case, Obama was not taking any questions, and Neil Monroe, the Daily Caller, asked questions, and the media chumped him right out of there, chased him all the way to Washington Monument for embarrassing Obama and violating protocol. But this is different. This is illegal immigration. This is the cause celeb of the campaign. This is the Democrat Party voter registration drive, is what this is. And the general of the Democrat voter registration drive among Spanish-speaking people in this country is Jorge Ramos. And he stands up. It's his turn. In his mind, he's going to get Trump. He's going to expose Trump. He's going to finally show everybody what a phony Trump is. He's going to end Trump's campaign last night. Instead, he gets deported. He gets thrown in the back of the coyote wagon, and the New York Times supports Trump. The New York Times says that Trump was in the right. The New York Times says that Trump owned the situation. Now, Jorge ended up on Good Morning America today and defended himself. He said he never expected to be thrown out of a press conference. Who was it talking to him? It was, another great journalist of our time, George Stephanopoulos, said, was Trump's reaction what you're expecting? Given the disputes between Univision and Mr. Trump?
No, what I would expect is that I can ask a question as a journalist, because that's our responsibility, and I would expect Mr. Trump to answer honestly about what he really wants to do, because he hasn't given us the specifics. What I didn't expect is to be thrown out of a press conference. Never in my life, and I've been a journalist more than 30 years, I've been thrown out of a press conference.
You weren't a journalist last night, Jorge. I don't know why I'm calling him Jorge. I don't even know him. But you weren't a journalist last night. That's the whole point. I mean, even the New York Times realizes you weren't a journalist. You showed up there with an agenda. Well, all journalists do. You know what the drive-bys all said last night? Snerdley on CNN? Honestly, they were comparing last night to Reagan in New Hampshire, saying, I paid for this microphone moment. They were. And I didn't even think it was that. They were comparing Trump to Reagan favorably. When Reagan, somebody was protesting Reagan not letting somebody else speak or whatever. I paid for this microphone. Everybody cheered. And the low-rent scum in the room shut up and got run out. And they were comparing this with Jorge Ramos to that. Now, Jorge claimed that he waited his turn, but he wasn't being a journalist last night. Everybody knows it. Quick timeout. Back with much more in a moment. Don't go. Now, what had happened was after the Nashua, I think it was the Nashua Telegraph, offered to host a debate between Reagan and George H.W. Bush, the FEC said that it would violate election rules. So Reagan arranged to pay for the event with his own campaign money. So he paid for the microphone. And then people were accusing him of hogging it or not letting certain. I paid for this microphone. And a huge ovation. Here is Jonathan in Orland, California. Great to have you on the EIB network, Jonathan. Hi.
Hi, Russ. Thank you for taking my call. My reason for calling is that I got a chance to see the interview, I think it was with George Stephanopoulos, on the incident that took place with Ramos. And he made a point of saying that, he believes that he needs to stand up for what he believes is true, which is disingenuous as a reporter or a journalist when they're out trying to bring the news to their constituents. And as you pointed out, he does, like so many on the left, have an agenda, and they come forth with the guise of being a journalist, and then they go to their audience and just give them this misinformation. What I saw last night was an activist trying to take a page out of the Black Lives Matters movement and interrupt Trump as he was speaking to another reporter. And I just feel that this is just going to be an ongoing thing with these so-called journalists coming out and pretending to be that they're reporters with honest truth when they're bringing nothing but lies.
I think that's exactly right. I think it's exactly right. When you, if Jorge Ramos said that he was standing up for what is right, well, sorry, pal, you're in the wrong business of what journalism is. Journalism's not standing up for anything, although it is. It has become that, which is the in their minds. But that doesn't even describe who. I think Jorge Ramos, this guy, folks, there's much more going on here than just this whole reporter journalism thing's a pure act.